Hello, welcome to Cerulean Arts Gallery. Tonight we're speaking with Tony Rosati in conjunction with the Cerulean Collective Exhibition, which is on view now through January 12th, 2025. Hello, Tony.
Hi, Michael.
Thanks for being here tonight.
It's my pleasure, and I'm happy to be here.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and the show.
Well, a brief sketch of my experience would go back to a time when I was assistant to the curator in at Albuquerque Gallery, which is where Abington Art Center is now located in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. I worked in a private museum known as the Lessing Rosenwald Collection of Rare Prints, Drawings, and Books. From there, I had earned an MFA in printmaking from Tyler, went on to teach at UArts, and then concurrently began teaching at the Academy and chaired the printmaking department there for about 28 years until the pandemic and things changed at the Academy. And so that's, I guess, pretty much a sketch of my experience.
And so your show is all printmaking and some watercolors, yes?
Yeah, a couple of different methods of making prints, and then there are watercolors, and the image that is being displayed right now is actually a monotype. I started printing monotypes by hand, and it became a really, no pun intended, handy thing to be able to do when the pandemic came and teaching had to move from in person to being remote. And to teach printmaking that way, you can't have a press. So hand printing methods is something that I had explored for a long time. And so that's what this is. It's uh, and I actually cut the print out of the paper it was printed on because it had some damaged edges and collaged the whole print onto another sheet of paper. Collage has been an on and off thing in my work too. So
And a monoprint refers to like one.
yeah, that's a really interesting word because there it begs another word. We have the words monoprint and we have the words monotype, and the words are often used interchangeably, but technically they are different and are distinguished from one another. What we're looking at right now is a monotype with a teeny bit of hand coloring and a little bit of collage. The clouds were a paper that was glued on, as well as the moon lake form was a silver leaf that was glued on. But monotype literally means one type or one kind. And the simplest way to understand a monotype is to say it's a printed painting, a painting done on a flat surface, transferred to paper, either by hand pressure or by running it through a press if the flat surface was a plate. Monoprint is a little bit different. And a monoprint is kind of a hybrid form of printing that some people know about and some people don't. So to be very brief about it, a monoprint has some part of it that can be replicated and another part that is painterly. For example, if you had a wood block with an image cut in it, you could ink it up and print it in black ink. But if you inked it up again and you painted a few red marks on the wood block and printed it, you would have painterly marks printing with the woodcut image. And then if you inked it again and painted things on it, the painterly marks would be different in the next print. So a monoprint is a hybrid of sorts. It includes painted elements and a replicated image element, but the two words are used so interchangeably that it's almost impossible to keep track of it. And the last thing I would say on that is if you need a literary reference for defining a monotype and a monoprint, It's a book published by the Metropolitan Museum of Art a couple of decades ago called The Painterly Print, where curatorial people and museum people and artists specifically define the difference between a monotype and a monoprint. Now, the one you're looking at now actually is a good example of a monoprint because the painterly elements, the blue, the brush strokes were done on a plate, and it's titled Red Coral. So the coral piece is actually a piece of manila folder, free-form cutout in the shape of a piece of coral. And the manila folder cutout was inked, and it was put on top of the painting on the plate and then run through the press. So I could take that piece of coral, color it differently, and put it on top of a whole different painting and print it again. So one could argue that the replicated part of this image is the cutout that will print the same way every time, even though it may be in a different color. But the painterly part prints once, and if there's a residue of ink left, you could print it again, but it won't be the same look as the first print. So I hope that I didn't want to get too technical with it, but I hope that is clear. So this wall is an array of monotypes, but a couple of monoprints, and a couple of them have some collage elements on it too, and a teensy bit, not on every one, here and there, a little bit of hand coloring when a color perhaps didn't print the way I wanted it to. Oh, you're going to the print that I titled A.D. Bunny. I'm sure that anyone who's familiar with printmakers, especially 15th century printmakers like Albrecht Dürer, would identify this as Albrecht Dürer's logo, and a bunny that is really a spin-off of a bunny that Dürer had in one of his prints. A time came when I was working in the Rosenwald collection where I learned about logos, artists putting their logo or their initials in the matrix, in the woodblock or in the etching. And they are reputed to be first-time logo users. And my understanding is that most history books on logos in printmaking give Albrecht Dürer credit for having been the first printmaker to put his monogram, cut it into the wood so that it would print with the image. And so this particular little cropping is from a print called The Holy Family with Hares, Rabbits. And it was a woodcut. And I was doing a series of prints that would kind of pay homage to the printmakers who were the first to use their monogram in an image. So although it was a woodcut, I photocopied it out of a catalog, and then I just took this tiny corner of the woodcut, and the actual size of this rabbit and monogram is not much bigger than a postage stamp. But I blew it up on a photocopy machine to be like 12 by, I think it's 12 by 17 inches, and transferred the image to a plate. And then I etched the image in the plate. So it's kind of a contradiction of sorts in that it was from a woodcut, but I turned it into an etching to pay homage to Albrecht Dürer, who is reputedly the first artist to put the monogram in a woodblock. And so I called it A.D. Bunny. And one of my friends says, does that have to do with an attention deficit bunny, which is kind of a corny joke, but it could be interpreted, I guess, that way.
So you're versed in numerous printmaking techniques.
Well, along the way, and with all the courses that I have been charged with teaching, yes, but it was a natural inclination of mine to experiment. The one you're zooming in on now is a monotype, but it's got stronger collage elements in it. It's a kind of Um, dark shapes on the bottom and towards the middle above the house are smeared and painted areas of ink on the plate, but the house is cut out of a magazine and glued onto the image afterwards. And the same with the top. That was actually the top part was something called chine collé that was glued on during the printing process. But so it's a combination of monotype and collage and something called chine collé, which I'm sure other printmakers would connect to as a medium. Now we come to snowmen. Yes. Well, this begs a story that I will try to be brief with. In teaching, when you do technical demonstrations, you want technique to be communicated clearly, and you want students to see how you do it. And therefore, with an audience of students and teaching a technique, you don't want to belabor the image and spend an extraordinary amount of time to develop it. So I had experimented with a few demonstration images, but one day I thought, a really simple image is Mickey Mouse. It's 3 circles. And I thought, what if I did some kind of a 3-circle thing? And it occurred to me to do a snowman. And so snowmen started in my etching demos and in my dry point demos because it was pretty easy to draw the 3 circles and scratch the plate a little bit to develop tones and show students how to ink and print it. And after a certain number of years, almost without my really being aware of it, I started to do snowmen in my own work. And I realized after a while that my technical demonstrations and the images I choose for them sometimes evolve into being part of the work that I do, that one would call my professional body of work. And this is a lithograph which is an exploitation of the snowman idea. I did a couple of lithographs like this, moonlit snowman, and I had a great deal of fun with them and exploiting the snowman.
It's appropriate for December.
Yes, yeah,
It's cold enough.
this,
It's cold
yeah.
enough.
Not enough snow this week and to make a snowman, but certainly to make one think about it.
You're right.
So, yeah, now we have fish. And I have to say that in the same spirit as how the snowman evolved in my work, the fish creeped up on me almost without my realizing it when I was teaching both etching or monotype. And the fish shape, the simplest shape, which would, in this particular print, there are several fish, and the ones to the right, the far right, has no fins. It's just a simple fish shape with a tail, no fins. And it's that particular shape that I started to use as a cutout from manila folder, just like I spoke about with the red coral piece, and ink it and put it on top of a monotype, a plate that had a painting on it. And I was using that as a demonstration, a way to introduce color in etching by putting a cutout that you colored on top of an inked etching plate so that the cutout would print in a different color. I got the idea, I have to say, from an artist whose work that I have enjoyed looking at and enjoyed being influenced by for many years, and that is the work by Mary Frank, who started out as a sculptor, did some paintings, but did a lot of monotypes and used cutouts there's a series of monotypes she did called Dinosaur, where she did cutouts of dinosaur bones and put them on a plate, colored and re-inked them and used them again and did a set. And that technique started to influence my work. And you accumulate these cutouts and you can use them over and over again and experiment with different ways of inking them. The one we're looking at now was such a thing. But there's on the backs of the fish, there's sort of a sparkle that even comes through with the zoom, and that sparkle is an iridescent medium, which I learned about from teaching watercolor painting, and I have sometimes used it. I try to use it very sparingly in some of my. I use it in my watercolors and in my prints, but I don't, it's like glitter, but I don't, it's very fine. And I think of it, the way I think of it is it's sophisticated glitter. And you can use it in a very sparing way, diluted, and it puts a little hint of a sparkle on something. It's not like overloading it with glitter to make it really obvious. And I liked that look. I liked that outcome. I've often used it in some of my watercolors of beaches, where when you're on a beach in the sun, the sand has a sparkle to it, especially if it's been wet by the ocean and the sun glistens on it. The one we're looking at right now is a monotype with a cutout fish, but the fish was this. Some people refer to this type of monotype as a double drop. Some people refer to it as double printed, and it's doing a painting on a plate, printing it, and then re-inking the plate and printing the re-inking on top of the first print. And so you get a layering effect. And that's what this is. And I did use a fish cutout that got flipped. There is a part of it, if you look at the fish's tail, the orange comes down, it's yellowish, and right behind that you can see the same fish tail covered in ink. And so it was just taking the fish cutout and flipping it when I ran it through again to get a double print of it. I like the outcome, very unpredictable, and I like kind of a random quality or a random way of working. You have an idea, but you introduce randomness to it, and it's always a surprise. One of the things that I think is so interesting about making any kind of art, but I think in particular with printmaking, is the anticipation of the image, because in printing, it prints in reverse, and during the printing, the ink may not print well or it may squish, and the outcome is unknown until you peel the paper back and see what happened. And sometimes the accidents in printing actually embellish the image with something very interesting. This is another series of cutouts, and there's ghosts of the cutouts because I printed it, moved the cutouts, re-inked some of the cutouts, but didn't re-ink the plate, so you have a residual amount of ink with the places that the cutouts were in, and they're ghost-like, and then the cutouts are re-inked or not re-inked, but moved to a different place, and you get a double printing. I really like the outcome. I kind of could picture it in my mind, but you really didn't see it until it was done. The top part of this print needed some help, and so the blue across the top has more than a little bit of watercolor on top of the blue ink. And so one could call it's more of a mixed media print. It's a mono print with probably 20% hand coloring here and there. So I went from using little tiny fish in small prints to one day thinking, what if I did a lot? And I started thinking of the larger plates as an aquarium. And so I started thinking, and it's an ongoing series now, my aquarium series. So now you're moving over to a body of, it's part of a series of watercolors that I did based on beaches on Long Beach Island, where I used to go a lot. Um, my life doesn't allow me to have the time to do that so much anymore. This is, see, I think this one is, yeah, Seaside Moon. And I remember when we stayed over at the beach at night when the moon came out and it was a clear night and the light hit the ocean. Um, it's a pretty spectacular visual, and I tried to capture a bit of that. And then a time came when I was on the bay side and looked, and the same thing happened, but a little bit of a different way. And this is Bayside because on the right in the background are these little specks of light because that would be the mainland, and the buildings and things on the mainland would have lights on them. So,
So, Tony, what appeals to you about watercolor?
well, again, like printmaking, there's an accidental quality to it or an unexpected uh, outcome sometimes. And early on, I remember trying to control everything in a watercolor and um, came to a time when I realized you had to let the watercolor have its way. And as soon as you let the watercolor have its way a bit, um, I started to think of it as a collaboration with the medium. It would paint things the way it wanted if you gave it time to do that, and then you could take control over other things. But this particular series, which includes about 8 or 9 more, um, was done on a really hot summer. And the house I live in has a slate roof. It's an old 1889 house, and the attic gets really incredibly hot in the summer. And I started to do a watercolor and found that it was so hot I couldn't paint for long. I had to leave. And then I'd come back up later and I realized that because of the heat in the summer and painting during the day, the watercolor dried really quickly. And I capitalized on that. I would lay down a wash, like the sky, which wouldn't take long to do, and leave for a little bit to cool off. And I'd come back up and it would be dry. And then I could continue another section of the painting and leave, and it would be dry. And so I found that it was a neat way, if you could suffer a little with the heat, a neat way to do a watercolor because it dried so quickly and it didn't let the watercolor bleed out. Some of the washes that transition, like the sky in this one, you put down the blue and you put a more concentrated touch of blue on the left and a little more on the right, and it kind of bleeds into the first wash. Well, if it's a damp, humid day and it's not real hot, the bleeding goes on for a long time and you lose capturing that sort of dark cloud-like form. And so I exploited that. I realized that I could put a little touch of a color on a wash and it's going to dry so fast that the color wouldn't change a whole lot. And it allowed me to capture these cloud-like shapes and fades in the sky that are similar to what I remembered in the material world, being on the beach and looking at the sky on a given day. So these are based sometimes on photos and sometimes on, I'd start with a line and make up things on it. And I realized, and some people have said, well, your horizon isn't level, especially on that lower right one. And I thought, well, yeah, I know the horizons aren't level because I realized in taking pictures of the beach, when you point the camera looking south on the beach, the horizon goes on an angle. And I like that quirk about it. And I thought, I don't want to be doing paintings that are all looking at the horizon dead on level. And so I remembered that it could be on an angle and still be credible. I just liked the way that looked. A little unlevelness, I guess. to it. Oh, yes. Well, these are the eggs. Um, and I used to claim that they were exceptional eggs. And I was trying to remember uh, how the eggs actually came about from teaching watercolor. There was a time when I realized that in teaching watercolor, if you have a subject and have the students work from the subject, they are painfully trying to make the watercolor look like the subject, whether it's a flower, a bowl, a glass. And I just thought it was inhibiting students in the way they painted. And so, like I referred to earlier, thinking of circles and Mickey Mouse and snowmen, I thought, how can I make this a really simple and unstressful watercolor experience? And the watercolor classes I teach, I like to teach watercolor classes that are for people who have never done it or who have had not a very successful experience with it. So I came up with the idea of not putting a subject in front of the class and just demonstrating how to draw an egg shape. And the egg shape I drew was a standing egg, not one that's horizontal. And the egg was on a table, and there was a wall behind it, and then there was a table in front of it. And so I started teaching watercolor by telling everyone you have to do 2 egg paintings, an egg on a table. It could be lying down or standing, have a wall behind it. The wall could be the sky with clouds, and then a table it's on, and the table could be grass or a field. And so with no subject, the students were asked to draw an egg shape, a horizon line, and I showed them different ways of making washes and adding different things. And I found that it really eliminated the stress of trying to make the painting look like something, because everybody's imagination is what they were following, and they didn't feel like they had to be validating it by making it look like something in the material world. And then I found that in teaching this technique, these eggs are mezzotint eggs. And a mezzotint isn't so easy to explain verbally, but there's a tool that you use called a rocker that you very meticulously literally rock over the plate until you've created a series of indents in the plate, almost microscopic, and they're so dense, they're like pixels, that if you ink the plate, it prints velvety black. And then to put an image in it, you burnish away some of the texture so that the ink doesn't get trapped as much, and the area you burnish prints lighter. And so I started taking the idea of the eggs that I was using to teach watercolor, and I started demonstrating mezzotint by rocking a small plate and burnishing an egg and a table. And then, so it didn't take too long to do, and it made the medium clear to students. But then in my own work, I started exploiting the eggs and spent more time on shaping the plates and making the series of eggs. And I used to quip that they are exactly the way I want them, and they
Oh,
are
brother.
exceptional too, exceptional. And so I
No
would,
more.
and then students would pick up on that and find other ways of using the word egg. The bird. Okay, so in teaching and talking about making art, we get the students ask questions about being an artist and making art and over your lifetime. And I found myself saying, well, we are salmon. We are compelled to do what we do. And the analogy with salmon was that they go upstream to spawn, and some of them don't make it, but they keep going, and they have to go up falls and encounter all sorts of obstacles, but they keep doing it no matter what. And I say, being an artist is kind of like that. You find a way to fit it into your life, whether you can do it every day or once in a while, you just keep going with it. We are salmon. And then another time, you're talking about being a free spirit as an artist and that you can create anything you want to. And I found myself saying, students, we are birds. We are free as birds. The birds can fly anywhere they want to, and we marvel at that. And before we mastered flight as human beings, it was an amazing thing, as it still is, to see a bird go from one tree to another in a blink. And so I had these two prints that I made. We are salmon, one was a salmon, and this is a hummingbird, and I titled it We Are Birds. And so they were kind of connected to some of the things that I found myself talking to students about in keeping with my teaching. Yeah.
It's a wonderful show, Tony.
Well, thank you, Michael, and I thank you for the opportunity to show this. And it was an opportunity to show several little series of work. And I would say that it took me a long time to realize that I was really not one dedicated to one subject. And it took me a long time, a couple of decades, to see that I simply worked in series and the subject would just change. And and it was it may sound silly, but it was a revelation to me that I realized it about 10 or more years ago, that's how I work as an artist. So yes.
So the show is up through January 12th. We hope people come down to see it. And everything is also available on our website, ceruleanarts.com. And thanks again for being here and have a great night.
Thank you, Michael. My pleasure. And you too. I'll see you soon.